Dear listeners of The Laundry, welcome back to another episode. Today we're joined by David Silverman. He's the CEO of Global FinReg. We will be discussing LEIs and VLEIs and what the future holds for LEIs in the AML and KYC space. Enjoy. Welcome, David. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
It's beautiful to have you on the show. We've been really excited to get somebody who's an expert in the LEI space to join us. But first off, maybe you could start by telling us a bit about your background, like your business background, where you're from, and so forth.
Sure. I'm actually Canadian, and I spent most of my working life, though, in the States, in Los Angeles and the New York area, and also in Denmark. So about half in the States and half in Denmark, based in Copenhagen. I've been working in financial technology for 20 plus years. I live in Copenhagen. Back in the US, I worked for two very large multi-strat hedge funds. So my background is really more on what we call the buy side in the industry. And since 2014, I've been an independent consultant. My company that does that now is called FinTech Builders. And in 2017, I started a company called Global FinReg with a couple partners to provide LEIs, Legal Entity Identifiers, to the Danish marketplace. And that was just before the MiFID requirements. And we launched in I think it was September of 2017. And by December, we had 6,000 clients. And since then, we have just over 18,000 now.
Brilliant. Great traction, it seems, then if you launched that recently and already got 18,000 clients.
It was just great, just being in the right place at the right time.
But you mentioned that you've been working in the financial space for 20 plus years. How have you seen and especially maybe shed some light on how the differences between working in the States for a hedge fund and working in Denmark is as well? But how have you seen sort of the financial landscape or the work climate within it change over the last 20 years?
I think it's become more complex and more global, more interconnected. And I think from an LEI perspective and from an AML perspective, I think the legal structures have become more complex. So I mean, I think when I look at it from the buy side, there's a lot. The products have become more interrelated, such as having more complicated swap products, or more legal constructs, or even additional things such as with crypto, and all those complexities. It require more of a global supervision. So I'd say it's become more complex, more stuff to supervise, more stuff to see and monitor. And I think what's most important is that IT has become even more important for all of these things, whether it's, order routing or tracking, or trade reporting, or figure out, what are the sources of trades, or even where the money's going. IT has become really, really important, and in the last 20 years.
Absolutely. And I understand you just mentioned the swap products as well. And I understand that in 2008, during the financial crisis, you actually lived through the financial crisis in New York, close to Wall Street as well.
Yeah, actually, LEIs are actually a very sort of personal, almost a personal thing for me. Back in March 2008, the financial crisis hit, and my wife was actually in the room when George Bush Jr. was at the New York Economic Club giving a speech, and was just there while everyone was checking their phones and running out, and because everything was just collapsing, and this, the reason why LEIs came about was really to find out who owns who. And that was sort of the main problem within with the economic crisis, was that with Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers, no one could figure out when the swaps unwound, like what was the entity structures, who was on the other side of the swap, and that was a massive problem. And so for us, it's almost like a personal thing. We were we were on TV watching as people we knew were packing their back boxes and leaving Lehman Brothers. And this was only 14 years ago.
Yeah,
And
it's very recent. It's not been long since I watched The Big Short, which is a brilliant movie, by the way, which I recommend all listeners of The Laundry. If you haven't seen it, you should see it because it's one of the best movies I've seen, especially sort of to picture what happened during the financial crisis in 2008. But would you fare it's, I guess that you've seen the movie, would you fare it's a fair description, sort of what they portrayed?
I think it is completely accurate. Michael Lewis is a brilliant author, and he, I actually, one of my CFOs was actually the CFO of Front Point Partners, and I've asked him as well. It's like, is this kind of accurate? You know, with the Steve Carell character, he's like, yep, that was exactly it, and it really does show in a brilliant way how things were connected and how it can just fall apart
Hmm.
when just even a credit agency doesn't, S&P just didn't do their job properly, and just how it was all interconnected, and just the fragility of it all. And that is what is really, really terrifying and feasibly could be happening right now. I mean, we're having a massive, probably another crisis and another financial crisis right now in a different way. And hopefully, I'm not sure what's going to be the fallout of all this. It may be just crypto, maybe it's something else, but I think LEIs will have an impact on that for sure.
Uh,
Yeah, but sorry to get back. I think to get back to your point. Definitely, yeah. I think Michael Lewis's portrayal is absolutely accurate.
Absolutely, yeah. It's interesting. Michael Burry, who also was sort of one of the had great foresight to see the crisis coming from, I believe it was 2004, and to the actual crisis hit in 2007, 2008. He keeps on tweeting now as well, like, okay, now it's the time for the second wave of the big financial crisis. So I feel a lot of people are worried about what's about to happen now.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's just you never know till it's happened though, and then it's all in hindsight. That's the scary thing. So
Absolutely. But I feel it's a great transition onto the topic of the day, which is LEIs, because, and correct me if I'm wrong, I know I've been trying to deep dive a bit into the LEIs and understand, due to the financial crisis, and as you say, it's very hard understanding what entities are you actually doing business with. The Financial Stability Board in 2008 found that it had to, we needed a system where across borders you'd be able to identify who are you doing business with, basically counterparty screening across different regions, across borders. Because before it was just the individual countries had their individual codes. Like in, for example, Norway, we have organisasjonsnummer, which is the business identifier. And then, for example, in India, you have a way different system, and it's very hard to communicate and identify across all this. And then, as a result, the Financial Stability Board created GLEIF, which is the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation, which is a non-profit where all these numbers sit. And anybody has access to this register and are able to identify the LEI number by just going straight to gleif.com. Is that a fair description?
that's a very fair description and exactly right. The LEI is a global business number, and it standardizes it across all the countries, and it's the only database that does that. So it's incredibly valuable. Also, because it's a source of truth within the global view of entities, because it tells you who owns who, and you might get a different picture based upon what registry you go to, especially when, in this increased globalization. You can go to Norway and see one view, and then go to Bolagsverket in Sweden and possibly see a
Mm.
different view, and same, and when all these companies are interrelated. So that it's incredibly useful for that. And it essentially shows who owns who. So the LEI is composed of the entity. It's composed of the direct parent who owns the company directly, and then the ultimate parent who is at the end of that chain.
So, but that means that the direct parent, meaning who owns who. So, say for example, I had a company, I'd have to then identify who owns my company as well.
Yep.
But then it's up to that company again to identify who owns them again. Correct?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there's also the ultimate parent. So you guys would, that company would also have the same ultimate parent as your company. So it's really who is the ultimate end beneficiary of the money.
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant initiative, and I'm really looking forward to this to sort of really catch on. Even though it's been 10 years, I see mass adoption will probably happen at some point. But in short, what do you think in terms of why should the world sorry, why should the world care about LEIs?
I think for various reasons, LEIs are being used for a variety of reasons, mostly around reporting purposes. So it's essentially used for things such as MiFID reporting, EMIR reporting, AIFMD reporting, even. Um, but it's also is very useful for the KYC process. It validates the companies. So I think that's really why people should care. It's a central place to find out about it. It's also there's a current initiative to enrich this information by Glyph. So this year, Glyph has expanded it to the entities to include fund information. So they're kind of on different verticals. They're expanding the information that you can gather about an entity. So this year if you're a fund, they're including you should include who is the fund company. So meaning there could be something that's not a company that's not direct parent, that's not the ultimate parent, but maybe somewhere in the middle that is the asset management parent. And you'll have to declare that. Also a umbrella structure and also a master feeder structure. These are more very specific to the hedge fund industry to really understand these entities better. So it's not just to know parents and ultimate parents, also to get more information about each entity. And I think you'll find Glyph doing that probably every year. Expand. Maybe they'll be doing it for multinationals next year. Maybe they'll be doing it more for government entities, but they'll start drilling down and getting even more more value out of these entities. And once again, on a global basis. And I think that's what's huge.
What do you think this will mean for AML and KYC?
I think it's still developing. I think for KYC, the LEI is already part of the process. You need to have an LEI. So might as well use it for the registration for the KYC portion. It validates the company. It doesn't do the full KYC, but it does a fair amount of it. So it definitely speeds the onboarding. I think for AML, I think this is just starting to emerge. I actually showed you recently how we've actually created an entity map that shows how LEIs are linked. And that right now there's 2 million companies, over 2 million companies that are registered in Glyph. As more and more of those companies get registered and with LEIs, the value for AML becomes greater and greater because it's a source of truth. It shows here's how who owns who. So I've done an entity map for Morgan Stanley where there's literally hundreds of LEIs all interconnected. Same for Goldman Sachs. Same for some of these very large companies that can really help figure out how can we trace where the money's going. And there can be, obviously if there's nefarious people out there, they're not going to they won't be registering their LEIs, but it's definitely a great source to speed up AML for compliant companies.
But it's been 10 years plus now since Glyph was founded. And it's sort of baffling that it's not been more mandatory, like more legislations making it mandatory for businesses to have an LEI number. Why is this?
Well, LEIs are inherently annoying to customers. They have to pay for it. They have to pay for it every year and get renewed. That information is verified every year, which also makes it valuable. But it's driven by regulators. So needed for MiFID trade reporting, MAR, which is market abuse reporting, CFTC for commodities reporting, things along those lines. So it's really required more for reporting purposes. So like say within Denmark, if you're going to trade something, before you open a brokerage account, you're going to have an LEI number. So it's needed for most of the reporting, which people find maybe somewhat annoying. However, things are changing. There is an initiative where it's on the FSB roadmap for cross-border payments. And it's actually very telling right now to talk about that because India is the first country to roll that out, and they're going to make it required in October, so next month, for companies to have an LEI if they're going to be doing a cross-border payment. And I think this is massive for AML and massive, for the LEI adoption. So anytime any company in India is sending money outside of India, they will be required to have an LEI. And this is going to be adopted by different countries over the next probably 2 years. I think the FSB has it for adoption for 2024, 2025.
Yeah, no, this is my point as well. Like, maybe I have a bit of a simplistic view of this, but it seems like this is a no-brainer. It seems like if you're doing cross-border payment, either if it's on your counterparties, if it's your value chain, if it's the suppliers, if it's goods or services that you sell, as long as any money sort of transfers from one country to another country, you shouldn't be allowed to do that if you don't have an LEI. But it might not be that simple, but I'm asking why? Why isn't it that simple?
Well, it's just, once again, it'll be driven by legislation once it's actually required. I mean, it's nice to have, but I think businesses, if you're PayPal or Wise, you don't want to send away your customer unless you have to. We're not going to have you can't do a transfer unless you have an LEI. Once it's actually required, then I think the value of it will become even more apparent, and in particular make AML job much, much easier. But it's, I wish it was just required now for everyone.
Yeah, but how do we get there? How do we get to the point where it is required for everyone?
I think it will be. I think it's just find them with more use cases, and I think the way to make it required is I suppose it's along those lines of the cross-border payment. It's like it's other uses as well where it's required, because just sometimes I think it'd be very valuable for AML, but for the average person, oh geez, that's kind of another. It's like having to go pay to get your URL for your website registered every year. That's just something I have to do. But I think that if we can maybe combine it with the business number adoptions, I think that's one way of doing it. But it's really, yeah. I probably didn't answer that correctly, but
No.
Sorry,
you're absolutely fine. But I'm thinking like in terms of just ESG, in terms of value chain mapping, supplier mapping, like it has so many use cases. As long as you know who are you doing business with and who are the person that you are doing business with, as long as you're able to map that out properly, you solve a lot of the key issues which we face in sort of the current complex climate of not knowing who's sanctioned, like who's on the end of, who's the ultimate beneficial owner, and so forth and so forth.
And actually, you're absolutely right. And I think if you go look at companies like Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs, they get it. That's why they have an LEI for every single entity, because they know how important it is. And it is incredibly valuable for so many research purposes, such as M&A, like figuring out what is that entity structure, or credit checks. I think there's a lot of different needs here that could be fulfilled. And I think then eventually it'll become sort of a no-brainer. Oh, you just need to get an LEI. And then that's when I think everyone's just going to do it as part of just incorporating their companies. Some of our clients do that. We have some leading law firms that use our product because we really help manage multiple LEIs in particular for clients. And they do that for their clients. Oh, you're going to start a business? Okay, you're going to need an LEI as well. And they'll take care of that for them.
So they would actually pay. They would actually pay for them.
Yes, exactly. Just pay it. And in fact, a lot of our asset manager clients actually just pay for the LEI. If you're actually managing a very large amount of money for a client, you just take care of it for them because you know it's required. You don't want it to halt anything in terms of their reporting. So I think it's something that's commoditized and will just be done automatically at some point.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't quite get the business model where they wouldn't pay for it, to be fair, because I know how much time is being spent on calculating who is the owners and so forth in a bank, for example, and how much time that takes up. It would be probably much cheaper for the bank just to pay the LEI sort of application for the business for them.
Yeah, I would definitely encourage banks to take this seriously and internalize the LEI process,
Mm.
which is something we help our clients do. It's like, okay, we'll give you a proper LEI website in your brand
Mm.
and do it that way and get your clients through the process and handhold it, which is really what we try to do. We try to simplify the process.
Because today, to issue an LEI certification, you need to be certified with Glyph, correct?
Yes. So there's actually three. So there you have Glyph, which is the holder of all the information. And then they have underneath them are local operating units,
Mm.
which are sort of very large companies, usually very large companies who've gone through a very rigorous accreditation accreditation. There's probably about 30 of those. And then underneath us, Global FinReg is a registration agent. So we're actually certified as well by the LOUs to provide LEIs numbers. So we get the information, but then we actually send it to an LOU who are ultimately responsible for the KYC of the companies. And they're the ones who actually do issue the numbers.
Mm.
But everyone has to be certified through the process.
Okay, it's very interesting. So that means the business model is that FinReg, for example, issues the LEI. So you guys sell the application form and take care of everything for them, and then you send the information to the LOU
Yes.
that then verifies the information and puts it into Glyph.
Exactly. And then we use a lot of technology, a lot of lookups to speed that up. So we do a lot of lookups to corporate registries and automatize that process and automatize the process directly to the LEUs as well. So we essentially can get lower prices by making the whole process smoother and better and build solutions around the LEIs.
Nice. Would you say there's a lot of scam artists out there as well? Understand, since there's so many companies now probably in the position to start issuing LEIs. Would you say that it's a competitive market so that scam artists and will arise?
Well, that's a really great question because, I don't think people would necessarily get scammed because it's essentially a KYC process. So otherwise you're essentially paying to do KYC on a company. And then you basically maybe done them a favor, but there's a lot of actors in this space who are really doing some where I wouldn't necessarily trust them. So I wouldn't necessarily always go for the cheapest solution. There's a lot of, um, agents out there that are just trying to send misinformation. Your LEI is going to expire. You have to come to us to renew it. And there's kind of scamming people that way just to get information or acquire a very large number of LEIs just to feasibly sell that to someone else. So they don't really take the business seriously. And ultimately, we're in a compliance space. We should be. It's for me, it's almost a personal thing. It's about really providing a value and taking it very seriously. And I've had a lot of talks with our LOUs about this. Like, this is our job. It's not we cannot be lying to our clients. So, we will tell you where your LEI is. We will tell you when it needs to be renewed. So I think, I don't think people have to be too concerned about being scammed, but be careful where you register.
Mm. Good tip. Would you say this is going to be sort of the big game changer in terms of reducing money laundering across financial systems?
I think ultimately, and I think that's going to be based upon legislation. I think, yeah, I think if you look at money laundering, it's really about moving money around. So it's when you start getting into, I think it'll be a game changer once the FSP really does make it works with different countries to make it a legislative thing. So, I mean, we've seen issues of Danske Bank, with money laundering to Estonia, and we've
Mm.
seen issues in the UK with money laundering. This become very, very big for that, and I think it's about the adoption and adopting it for not just cash, but also for other types of money or wealth transfer, such as cryptocurrencies. As long being able to track where that money comes from, I think that it will be a massive, massive game changer.
You mentioned cryptocurrency there. So with cryptocurrency, there's also a unique identifier that goes into the blockchain, which is a large portion of the value proposition of the blockchain. And sort of you need mass adoption to make it viable, and you need transparency, which it should provide, which is one of its key value propositions. So mentioning these points, I feel there's a lot of similarities with the value propositions of the legal entity identifiers, the LEIs as well. Would you say that's a fair description?
I definitely think it'd be a fair description. And in fact, it's kind of the holy grail of the blockchains is the identity layer. This is something that you'll find in certain blockchains like Concordium trying to solve. And I think that you'll see that also in Ethereum, that this is becoming very, very prevalent. The whole use of there's, it's actually really interesting. The last podcast with Marcus from January, who talked about how there's really is no anonymous blockchain. This is true. Like, yeah, you do get, everything is baked into each blockchain, but then how do you actually then go the next mile, which is figuring out, okay, what company is associated with that? And that's very, very important, not just within cryptocurrencies, but also if you look at Ethereum and smart contracts, which is ultimately what you want to do, which are really legal agreements. How are you going to do a legal agreement with a company if you can't verify who is the company behind it?
Seems like a great combo then if you both have sort of the blockchain identifier as well as the LEI number in the same transaction.
Definitely. Or, actually, I think that's going to bring us to our next point, I think, or my next point, which is about VLIs,
Yeah.
which is, I think is very, very exciting, which is something like Life is just coming out. Because yeah, you could have that number, but you're probably not going to embed that number into the blockchain. But that's kind of where VLIs come in.
So what is a VLI?
A VLI is a verified lie. It's a verified identity. Verifiable identities are really, really important with the blockchain world. So what this is the VLI verifies the company and issues a certificate for it, which can then be put into a wallet. It also verifies the signatories. So the signatories also are verified and then can have their wallet as well. From there, you have the root of trust. And you can then essentially do verified credentials for the entire company. So from there, so for example, if your CEO at Strise had a VLI, they could then give you a credential that could go into your wallet that then you can either act on behalf of the company. And then that's how it can interact with the blockchain. And that to me is the game changer of the blockchain, and also say within cryptocurrencies to track where the money's coming from. So, in the last podcast, Marcus pointed out that there is no anonymity within the blockchain and within crypto. It all goes to the exchanges. That might be true, but how are you going to get that information from the exchanges? If within a smart contract or within a transaction, you have a verifiable lie where you can then track it directly to a company, you don't even have to go to the authorities to go to the exchange to find out who did the transaction. You could actually really find out, who did it, because it'll actually be attached. That certificate will actually be attached to the blockchain. So essentially, instead of having the LEI embedded within the blockchain, you'll actually have a VLI certificate that's attached to the blockchain.
But the VLI will work without the blockchain as well. It will work with traditional fiat currencies as well. Is this correct, or is that is it just a pure sort of blockchain concept?
Well, it's a certificate, so it's a digital certificate that can be used in a wallet or for whatever purposes. I think it's not so much.
But is it stored? Is it stored on the blockchain, or could you use it without any sort of blockchain technology as well?
You could use it without any blockchain as well. It'll be blockchain independent. So
Okay.
it won't be tied to any one blockchain, and it can be used for multiple reasons. So, for example, I think I mentioned, smart contracts. I mean, which is, I think, much more interesting even than the digital currencies. That something's could definitely explode. NFTs as well, obviously. Pretty much any digital verification. There could be other ways of using the VLI. I mean, for example, and maybe it'll be integrated with, say, Banky Day, or maybe here in Denmark, MIDI Day, or something along those lines. I think there would be a lot of different applications for it.
Brilliant. So 2 years from now, VLIs, LEIs, where are we at? Where do you think the market's heading?
I think there'll be, in 2 years, I think the number of LEIs are going to multiply by 5 to 10. At least I hope so. Obviously, as a someone who gives them out. But I think it's always been driven by legislation. So if it's required by cross-border payments from multiple countries, you're going to see a huge adoption of it, just like we have in India. And then it's going to become even more useful for the AML process. I think there's going to have to be a tipping point where, as you said, it's just this can be used in different ways for businesses. Same thing with VLEIs. The VLEI is just, the pilot programs are just coming out. We don't offer it yet at Global FinReg, but it's something that we'll be planning on doing soon. But it's really just a question of timing. We could be, 6 months away from it. We could be 3 years away from a mass adoption of VLEIs, but it's definitely the best way of, of digitally verifying someone on the blockchain.
That brings me to sort of my last question, which is, when you think we'll reach critical mass on this one?
That's a very difficult question. I think there's two.
That's why I saved it for last.
There's like about 2 million companies now that have LEIs. I think, there's already been a very large adoption of it. I think in the last, over 1 million. I think when we started this, there were around 1 million LEIs back in 2017. So those have been double. I think that it'll grow exponentially. So I think critical mass maybe another 5 years, but it's a very, very difficult thing. I don't control the legislation process. So, but if you go onto GLIFE's website and go look through all the different rules, there's so many rules in so many different countries or organizations or even, that are using it. It will expand. And I think there'll be one use case that'll probably be the killer use case. I think there will be VLEIs, but we'll see.
It's going to be super interesting following this. And I really do appreciate you joining the podcast. It's been brilliant talking to you, David.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Frederick. I really appreciate it.
Okay, have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Laundry. For more content, please follow us on LinkedIn and go to Strise.ai to check out the other podcasts. Talk to you next week.